This is No Nonsense Leadership, where we explore better ways to develop software, products and services. Join world-class experts for honest insights and practical advice to help you lead teams, products and organisations clearly and confidently. Subscribe now to learn the best ideas in the field. In this episode, we talk to Rich Mironov about increasing your influence with executives. We discuss organisational politics and explain how power, stories and alliances are crucial in shaping company dynamics and decisions. Rich describes the disconnect between business and technical teams and the importance of expressing arguments in the language of money. And he provides strategies for product leaders to succeed, stressing the need for demonstrating and selling your achievements. Join us to learn how to navigate corporate politics and enhance your influence within executive circles. Welcome to the No Nonsense Agile podcast. I'm Murray Robinson.
I'm Donna Spencer.
And I'm Rich Mironov. Thanks for letting me join.
Thanks for coming on, Rich. We want to talk to you about organisational politics and driving change at the C-level. But can we start by getting you to tell us a little bit about who you are and what your experience is?
Sure, I'd love to. My first job in tech, I wrote COBOL in the early 1980s. So I'm older than a lot of folks who are listening. I've been doing product management since the late 80s. And for the last 23 years, after 6 Silicon Valley startups, 4 of which we file under character building and good life lessons. I've been a solo entrepreneur. That's 15 turns as an interim chief product officer, coached many scores of VPs and CPOs, a couple of hundred consulting clients around strategy and product organizations. So I'm a pure play product guy, mostly enterprise B2B, mostly thinking about the organization as well as just the product.
Do you work with some bigger companies as well?
I've worked up and down all of the size choices. Honestly, the early stage bare metal startups are the most fun. The huge companies pay the most money and take very little advice and are hard to move around.
All right. So we wanted to talk to you about surviving and succeeding in organisation politics based on some research that John Cutler's just done. But I know you wanted to reframe that. So what's the issue with talking about organisation politics for you?
When I hear somebody say organizational politics or executive politics, I immediately assume that they don't know how politics works. The folks who really do politics at the executive level talk about organizational change. We talk about coalitions. We talk about moving the business ahead. Of course, there's politics in everything we do, but I think calling it politics, it's a slur. I do a lot of writing about what I call the language of money. The language of money is what all the executives except the VP of engineering, the VP of product speak. And we as product and engineering and design folks want to get the rest of the world to deeply understand all the details of everything we do and appreciate us as people and designers and product managers and engineers. And my observation is that almost nobody on the go-to-market side of these companies cares at all about those things. Everybody I know in enterprise sales believes that creating software is trivially easy, and they confuse typing with writing code. And they confuse writing code with building product. And so whenever they need something, their assumption in their head is, oh, I should just ask for it because it's important to me. It can't be more than 10 lines of code. I bet it'll only take 5 minutes. Just do it and stop complaining. But on the other side, we're lecturing about how our backlogs are sorted instead of talking about the money we're going to make for the company when we ship the most important thing.
Do you think organizations are meritocracies?
I'd say the vast majority are some bit of meritocracy layered over with personalities, layered over with whether the CEO had a bad childhood, layered over with how the board of directors is beating up the CEO for not having sales. I think our fundamental idea that everyone will understand and appreciate my good work because it's good work and they all know what good work looks like is mostly not true.
Maybe good work isn't that important. Maybe just okay work is what's important and the rest of it is all about getting everyone together on the same page.
I think that's part of it. When I'm coaching product leaders, one of the things that they never think of doing that I always push them over and over again to do is what I call merchandising. when one of your teams does something really good that puts money on the top line of the company, I, as a product leader, need to go to every single meeting in the next 2 weeks and explain it and praise it and applaud it and send it out, because otherwise folks don't know that the folks on my teams are accomplishing things that matter to the company. I think we're missing the chance here as leaders to promote and applaud and show that the folks who work for us do something really important to the company. And if we don't do that, then it's not unreasonable for the other leaders in the company who don't really understand what we do or why it's important to not give us credit for it.
We shared with you our discussions we had with John Cutler about the SenseMaker survey he's just done. What did you think about what people were saying in that survey?
I thought it was spot on. There was nothing in there that surprised me. There was nothing I haven't heard every week for the last 6 or 12 months. Folks in the product and engineering and design spaces are hurting. Their jobs are being reduced. They often don't have representation in the executive suite. Much of the company doesn't really understand what they do, and nobody's helping them understand that. When someone comes to me and says, I think I would like to be a product manager, I take the other side of that argument for the first 10 minutes, because I think it's a great job for a very narrow group of people who have a certain odd set of skills and capabilities. But man, is it hard. I've stopped doing that CPO, VP of product job because it was too hard.
Well, it's a job that has a lot of responsibility and very little authority or budget.
Exactly right. And in a situation where the company is under revenue pressure, which they all are, where everyone on the go-to-market side is measured on the current quarter's revenue. And when we're short, everyone on the go-to-market side has an idea of something that product and engineering and design could do to bring in more money this quarter. And I've never met an engineering design team that had any excess time or space. We're all fully booked. And so there's this parade of people who are desperate to find a way to put another 100,000 on the top line in the next 3 weeks. That's contrary to how we build product that's going to succeed. And so there's a pretty natural conflict here between the medium to long term, think of all of the segments and large numbers of users, build for the masses, do really good work on one side. And yes, that's all fine. But I, as the head of sales, are going to be fired in 3 weeks if we don't locate another 400,000 in revenue for the quarter. And I have some prospect that's telling me if we would just build a custom thing for them and take everybody else off of what they're doing, they'd give us 400,000 and I get to keep my job. You can call that politics. You can call that misaligned goals, but it's real.
Yeah, but you yourself have an argument about why you shouldn't do one-offs, don't you?
I've endlessly written and talked and lectured and pushed for decades about why one-offs are 20 times as expensive as we think they are, and they may not finish anything, and they're going to blow up our roadmap. And sometimes I win that argument and sometimes I don't. But the way to make that argument is to talk about money. I claim that none of the go-to-market execs at any of the companies I've worked for can hear anything I say unless the sentence is denominated with a currency symbol at the front. So when I say, look, our strategy to make our goals next year require 50 million more on the top line, and we've chosen these 2 market segments because we think they're worth 50 million, and I'm going to have to take 5 of my teams off of making money next year to do this $100,000 deal, which, by the way, will never land. And all of us are going to lose our jobs in 3 quarters because we've traded off a lot of future money for a small amount of short-term money. That's an argument that executives have every day and understand.
So you just said that product management is really hard, and when people are talking to you about doing it, you have a 10-minute convo about why they shouldn't.
Yes.
Am I hearing that the key skill that product managers need is strong financial literacy and financial communication?
It's a more intense need as you move up the organization. So if I'm the VP of product and I have 15 product managers working for me and not all of them are very financially literate, that's okay. I can cover for them. I can coach them on it, and I can go into the meeting and make the argument that needs to be made. But I think product managers who can't talk about how their products are going to make money are missing a key skill. In the software products business, we build the bits once and we sell them thousands of times without changing the bits. But when we talk to the finance folks, what we have to say is if we can sell exactly the same bits and have no professional services, no specials, it's 100% margin less whatever we pay our sales team, 2%. So we can be in a 98% margin business. If you want to sell professional services, which is a 30% business, then you need to help me understand how the company makes money by doing professional services instead of building repeatable products. So what we've done there is we've taken the right argument, but we're framing it in a way that our audience can absorb and understand and respect.
So is this why product management, engineering, designers are hurting so much? Because there's a mismatch in their ability to communicate with their organizations?
I think this has always been true. It's maybe less true now than it was 3 decades ago, but I don't think this is a new phenomenon. I think what we're seeing is a lot of global economic effects and bad behavior on the part of some very famous CEOs. And so there's this whole founder mode BS. There's this whole I chopped 80% and I'm still in business. That means that we're asking all of those folks to do 3 or 4 times as much with less. They're failing, they're suffering, they're hurting, they're frustrated. The cost of money was really cheap 3 years ago. It's not cheap. There's a lot of private equity firms that are trying to extract or sell for value right now. I think it's a cycle. And in 2 years, we may find that product engineering and design are back at the big kids table.
So that survey that John did, there was a couple of things that really stood out. One was that people are operating in an environment of fear and poor direction from their executive team. So people are complaining. Every executive gives them a different goal, or they give them a goal and then change their mind a week later. So there's no unified goal that people can gather around.
Yes. I think almost everybody I talk to is in an environment of fear. They're worried about the next job cuts. They're worried about being de-skilled. Some of their execs think they can be replaced by chatbots, which I don't buy for a minute. On the other hand, I think there's always been a complaint that we don't get good enough direction from our execs. And I think that's a shared failure. Product folks at every level need to suggest or propose possible strategies or maybe alternatives on the assumption that maybe actually nobody else knows what a strategy is or they haven't thought it through. As a CPO, I often come in and the company has no strategy. Now, I can complain that there's no strategy, or I can put one together and then figure out how to feed it to the other members of the executive team so they think it's their idea and they buy it. Yes, go-to-market execs tend to think short-term. They think about accounts instead of markets and segments. They change their minds every week. But the product leadership, myself and the folks at my level, fully expect that. That is the norm. And so we have to have a set of tools and conversations where each time the sales VP comes to me and says, I just got off the phone with JP Morgan Chase, and they told us if we could just add teleportation to our product by Friday, they would give us $5 million. Every VP of product, every CPO has his conversation once or twice a week. And so we have to address it directly and say, that's great, but first of all, it's impossible. Second of all, if we're going to do that, here's the 6 commitments that we made last quarter to our biggest customers that we are going to have to cancel and postpone because there's nobody waiting for your request. So let's talk serious about, does it support the company strategy, and does marketing agree, and how is finance going to make this work? And do we agree that this is such a big opportunity that we're going to blow up the roadmap? Or am I going to remind you of the last 18 of these conversations that we've had in the last 18 weeks, 14 of which didn't close? And by the way, I never want to embarrass my peers in public. So we go off and have lunch and do this. I believe heads of product have to be willing to speak the truth and have really thick skin.
This sounds super logical to me. Yes, you've asked me to do a thing. I already had these things on my to-do list. What of these things do you want me to drop? Why doesn't it happen?
Well, let's think about a whole executive team. You've got a head of marketing, a head of sales, a head of support, a head of professional services, a head of finance. Each of them has their own list. And the overlap in those lists is generally small. And each of them is starting from the assumption that it's a very reasonable list. And if we just cared more about their list, we could do all of those things. It turns out when we add up all of those lists, we generally get something between 20 times and 50 times the capacity of our entire engineering team. So part of the education here is I go back to every one of those stakeholders. I say, okay, I know you gave me a list of 50. I think I can give you one, but you have to tell me which one it is. And by the way, I get to veto it if it's too big. And then every time one of your folks comes to me or anybody on my team and says, this is the most important thing for the company, I'm going to send them back to you because they just gave me a different answer than you did. And by the way, we're going to write it down, and occasionally in private, I'm going to embarrass you by showing you what we agreed last week in a way that nobody else sees.
One of the things that came through strongly in that survey was that people feel that they are not getting support from their line manager and they're getting undermined by their peers. So in an environment where people are stressed, fearful, often very confusing, people are reporting that other people are not being open and honest with them. They may be supporting them when they have a one-on-one, and then they find out later they've been undermining them to their executive team.
Sure. And we've seen that in a lot of places, but it's not true everywhere. If you're at a company where the head of product isn't supporting the people working for them, that's a huge problem. If you're in a company where there's a lot of backbiting and gaslighting and people throwing each other under the tram, that's horrible. If you're at a company where the CEO brooks no objections and every week blows up the roadmap, if we posit those things as true, there's an evaluative moment here where we try to think about whether this is an extreme case or it's a short-term phenomenon or it's a few people causing trouble. Because if the company really has a toxic culture, which many do, then the ultimate answer is you're going to leave and you're going to look for someplace better. But if this is a local phenomenon, if they temporarily brought somebody in to run the product or engineering team that's not qualified or doesn't support their folks, you have to know the difference between local transient circumstances and, on the other end, this is a company run by people who are amoral, don't understand what we do, don't care about our work, and just want to extract our time.
Okay, so what if you are in that in-between space? It's not toxic, but it's not good either. What do you do to succeed?
So you have to take 2 hours a week and look for your next gig. And then with your last 68 hours, you do the work so that you're moving the company ahead, you're moving your product ahead, you're raising issues with people who seem to be receptive. You're trying to improve the current situation while at the same time, you know that the likelihood is that you might need to leave.
So positing a common situation where it's difficult but not toxic. So you think you can do something, you're going to try your best. First of all, how should you relate to your boss? How should you build a relationship with them?
Let's choose a level to be more specific.
Let's say somebody who's below the C level, but they have their own reports. So they're right in the midst of it.
Got it. They're in that ugly middle area. So let's assume that your immediate boss wants to do right by you and isn't looking to undermine you or get you fired, and that the people working for you are, for the most part, good, hardworking folks. They're not perfect, but you think you can groom most of them into being really good at what they're doing. So that's a place to start. I think there's a lot of thoughtful discussions that you can have with your C-level boss about the challenges, the interrupts. And usually I'm trying to formulate some reasonable ask. So complaining, identifying the problem is good, but maybe the person you work for doesn't know what to do either or needs a hint. So for instance, let's come back to the blowing up the roadmap every time an executive wants something problem. As a director, I probably can't tell the other VPs in the company that they don't get what they want. So I need some agreement with my own VP or my own CPO to say, when this is happening, I need to bring you in, or I need to escalate to you, or I need your help in negotiating back to a sensible plan, because I don't have the positional authority to tell the VP of sales to go pound sand. And if the executive I work for understands what we do and wants me to succeed and has my back, then we're going to have some discussion about the different ways we can divert those things or send them to that person or slow them down or form better trade-offs or frame them in terms of strategy. All those might work in some particular organization, but not in another one. And so we have to figure out what our response is. Notice I'm trying to avoid playing just the victim here. Now, often we are the victims and there's nothing we can do, but assuming that there's things we can do, then my manager and I are going to strategize around approaches and processes and coalitions. Often I find that marketing and finance really understand why the thing that sales wants isn't what we should do. And so rather than me being the only voice in the room, I spend a bunch of time socializing and working with and coalition building with the other folks on the executive team so that when the sales VP says, let's throw our roadmap under the tram and do something completely different, the finance person says, then how are we going to make our number next year? And the marketing person says, but then all of our campaigns are for the wrong people. And the support person says, well, that's great, but nobody's trained on it. I'm trying to frame this not as good and bad, as evil and virtuous, but as how do we have the right conversations with the right people to get to the right answers, if that's possible. And in half the organizations, it's not, but I think in half the organizations, it is.
What about when your boss throws you under the bus? You think you've got this relationship, and then one of your boss's peers complains about you, and then the boss comes down hard on you.
Yes. There was a woman I was coaching, and her boss just threw her under the bus. And I think she's brilliant, and I think she's tremendously talented, and the company she works at is lucky to have her. And if I were hiring, I would hire her in a millisecond. And there's very little you can actually do when your boss throws you under the bus. She's at a big enough company that there are other divisions that she's worked with that she's respected in. And so she's hustling to try to find another group or another home within the company. But the real answer, I think, is if your immediate boss throws you under the bus, you're out of a job. And maybe there was a reason and maybe there wasn't. But in general, by the time that's happened, there's been a whole bunch of HR and executive discussions that you weren't part of, and this gig is over.
Yeah. So this is about being blamed for something. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe it's...
Sure. And we can't control the folks we work for, but we can and should be thinking about how trustworthy they are, how supportive they are. Of course, sometimes there's a thing that happens, but I generally find that these aren't isolated instances and they don't happen on a moment's notice.
All right, let's move on to the next stakeholder group. We want to build alliances with our peers within our same team and also people at our level across some of the other teams that we have to work with, like sales and engineering. What's the best way to do that?
I'm going to divide the problem in half here. So when I'm thinking about the maker side of the company, I'm thinking about collegiality and honesty and safe spaces and praise and finding the middle ground. Here's a bunch of really expensive, wonderful, talented people who do things I can't do. So I know that when I'm sitting with my designers, the last thing I want to do is argue about pixels and talk about whether they did the right design. What I want to do as a product person is ask the strategic questions like, I'm not sure I understand why this workflow is better than the other one. Can you walk me through it? Or tell me what you were thinking because I'm not seeing it. And when I'm sitting in the room with a senior architect who really knows how systems are built, I reach way down for humility and I want to say, have you thought about X and Y? And when they tell me they have, if I respect them and I know their work, then they win that argument. In the same way that when they say, we're going to need 6 more months on the schedule because we're all running late, I get the final call on whether we ship less or we wait longer. And we have arguments, but it's my call. When we cross the boundary over into the go-to-market side, sales, marketing, finance, services, support, I generally assume that they don't understand what we do or aren't really interested in what we do at the detail level. And so we have to have a different set of discussions about company strategy and revenue and choices and the lack of infinite resources. But as the head of product, I reserve the right, along with my design and engineering leads, to make the final call on what we're building.
It's quite often the case that you will do all of that, and then you will find out, maybe from your boss, that one of those people who's been going around complaining about you and undermining you with others. What do you do when you've discovered you're dealing with one of those people who's undermining you, even though you've done all this great work around building respect and alliances, or so you thought?
Sure. And let's recognize that happens a lot and that there may not be a perfect answer here. So let's think about situations that are a little more specific than that. One is there's one toxic person at the company who's not the CEO, who's breaking everything, who's pissing everybody off, who's creating chaos and turmoil. I would suggest that most of the executives of the company know this. And so there's some discussion where we, not including that person, talk about how that person is creating chaos and frustration everywhere. And that we throw it back to the CEO to say, we're all at the C-level frustrated here. That person works for you. There are going to be a lot of bad results. People are going to walk out the door. We're going to miss revenue and product launches and everything else if we don't deal with this. So please, it's your job. Take that person out and promote them to some other company somewhere. If the company culture is one that really reinforces that, that's really hard to change unless the CEO and I have a very long-standing, deep work relationship and trust.
Often there's competing narratives about what the problem is and what the solution is. So you have a narrative. The other person who's got their own coalition has a narrative. So there's quite often the sales narrative versus the product narrative versus the engineering narrative. What can you do if you want to stay?
First, we have to recognize this is a people problem, not a process problem. And no process is going to fix the people problem. I'm going to take a side trip for a minute and then come back. I have a long piece I write about how every company that implements an internal request ticket system, where when people need something, if they fill out a form that goes to product and engineering, fails. Okay? Because it turns out that everybody in the company wants 40 things. And when we put up the form that says, fill out this form, the assumption that everybody has when they fill out the form is that by filling out the form, they're going to get the thing they want. I need a new laptop, I fill out a form. I need a cell phone, I fill out a form. I need us to re-platform our entire software suite, I fill out a form. And so the process doesn't fix the capacity issues or the assumptions on the other side. If we've got a culture issue and a people issue at the C-level of the company, then we have to address it as such. We might bring in some consultants who are organizational design psychiatrist consultants who are going to sit with the CEO and help the CEO understand who's blowing a lot of smoke and blowing up the company. As an individual, I only have some impact on the company culture because maybe I'm not believed or maybe my narrative isn't strong enough. The CEO has more. So I think of these as people problems first. Maybe I can pull those folks aside and give them a talking to. Probably not. I always try. Maybe we can split the company in half and we have the product half of the company and the sales half of the company. Usually doesn't work, but these are going to be raw, emotional, unpleasant, complex discussions between the folks who get paid the most money around the table at the company. They're not going to be a recipe that says, we have a different way of having you interrupt engineering, go this way. Because when the sales VP is going to miss the target for the quarter in 3 days, they're going to go around me to my engineers and product managers unless there's a penalty for that.
I think most senior level decisions are based on accepted narratives about how things are and how they should be. And these narratives are often based on an influential person's subjective and self-interested opinion. And people close to customers, users, finances often know that these narratives are false or self-serving. So it becomes a battle over narratives.
Yes. So I'm going to give you a rare for me example of being able to turn that around. Long ago, I parachuted into a Silicon Valley security software company on a Monday. I spent Monday and part of Tuesday morning talking to everybody, listening, learning. And the narrative from most of the executive team was that engineering couldn't ship anything. And so the general assumption was we're going to have to market and sell whatever we got because engineering actually can't ship anything. I sat down with the VP of engineering and I said, well, what's going on? And he gave me a whole different narrative, which is they had 15 things that reached 92% done. But every time they got near finishing something, the rest of the exec team would interrupt and blow it all up and we'd start again. And so we had to come up with a way to change that narrative. So I asked the VP of engineering, find me 2 things that we could finish by Friday and we could ship on Monday. The smaller, the better, the safer, the better, whatever you've got in the closet, we need to ship something. And in fact, on Friday, they shipped a patch and one little feature. And on Monday morning, I got to come into the executive team and I said, by the way, engineering shipped some new code on Friday. And it got very quiet because for the last 6 months, everybody had been saying that engineering couldn't ship anything. And suddenly everybody was hitting me up. They said, how do I get my thing into next week's drop? Now, notice what happened there. One, we got engineering out of the doghouse. And I was able to go down to the engineering team, which sat in a different part of the building than everybody else and didn't have the same card keys and wasn't allowed upstairs. I was able to go down to engineering and say, you guys are heroes. The prevailing narrative was that you couldn't get any work done and you just proved them wrong and you're my heroes. Everybody felt better. And then over the next 2 days, every single person other than the head of engineering came to me and said, I want my thing to be next. And now we were having the product conversation, not the engineering conversation, because I was going to help us figure out what next 2 things we were going to do and why they were important. And within a few weeks, we had removed the assumption that engineering couldn't get anything done. Now we were having the argument that we wanted them to do more and we wanted them to do other things. But I think it's very possible to show, and I explicitly separate showing from telling because nobody listens, but it's possible to show that we can ship a product that makes more money. It's possible to show that we can patch a bunch of bugs and take less tickets. It's possible to show that if we make some repairs to the architecture, we can double performance. It's possible to show that we can add some new wizards into the onboarding process and get customers in 4 times faster than we were before and not have everybody in support work all weekend.
You had a position where you could come in being an external and being able to look across. I was wondering whether it's possible for people within an organization to do things like that.
So I have a great privilege because I come in for a short amount of time and honestly, I don't want to stay and I don't care if they fire me. And the best thing for every one of my clients is to hire my full-time replacement because that's really what they need and deserve. So I have some positional leverage that other people don't have. So first, let's recognize that. If my livelihood and putting food on the table for my kids requires me to keep this job, then I may choose to be a lot less forthright. I may reframe my arguments. I may go to the well fewer times. I may take no for an answer. And those are all reasonable choices for people. Now, after that, you have to decide if you want to stay. And again, back to the idea that it's going to take me a while to find my next job. But honestly, the half-life of a VP of product is 17 months. And you know what the number one reason is that they all get fired? Is because the rest of the executive team is tired of hearing them say that everybody can't have everything they want. So if we just brought somebody in as head of product who was more malleable, who was more agreeable, and who could squeeze 20 times as much out of the product and engineering and design team as you could. So a key skill for somebody at the executive level is to really understand what's happening, not just what folks say.
I've worked with a lot of senior executives who were creating a lot of problems because they didn't know what the impact was of their decisions. How do you get in touch with your customers, your users, your finances, your people doing the work, when you may have layers below you who are just telling you whatever they think you want to hear?
First, let's say if I have people working for me who tell me what I want to hear instead of what's true, I've already failed and I might as well leave. So let's assume that I either have a group of people who are good at what they do and trust me and I trust them, or I'm newly arrived and I'm going to work really hard to give that impression from day one by trying to act as supportive as I can and asking good questions and not criticizing folks for things they can't control. As a leader, I'm not going to do the ground level work. I'm not going to interview the customers myself. I'm not going to do the financial projections for the products myself. I'm not going to critique the architecture myself. My job as the head of product is to represent the people who work for me in a way that helps the company make better decisions. That's the job. And one of the very first things I do whenever I come into a company is I get a one-on-one with everybody in my organization, and they all think it's just a happy greeting thing, and it's somewhat. But one of the questions I ask every single product manager is, how many customers did you talk with in the last 2 or 3 weeks, excluding sales calls? And anyone who says none and isn't embarrassed and doesn't have a reason, they get an immediate promotion to some other department in the company because they're not product managers. The essential input for product folks is a really frequent, long series of conversations with customers and users and former users and partners where there's nothing at stake other than telling the truth. We're not trying to sell something. We're not trying to sign a beta agreement. We're not trying to fix a ticket or something that's broken. My folks have to have one of those calls every week. And at the end of 10 weeks or 20 weeks, they really do know what's happening in their markets. And so I have to trust that. Now, often I have to reposition it. I have to frame it up for them because maybe they don't have the translation skills I have. But I have to have a team that really knows what's happening in the market, excluding what sales and marketing and the other folks are telling us, because we're going directly to the source. And by the way, designers better be on those calls because I don't want my product managers to have to be designers, and my engineers in rotation so they can hear what users are really saying, because that's what's going to motivate my teams to do great work. But I'm going to look to my staff, my team, to frame up the trades, to explain the things to me. And then it's my job to figure out how to sell it to the rest of the executive team. Now, I'm allowed to have smart ideas and I'm allowed to share those with my team, but I'm not allowed to tell them they're all wrong unless they're actually wrong.
A pretty typical situation is you come in and the previous person has been shooting the messenger. So these people are afraid to tell you the truth. What do you do then?
We do the best we can do. I tell them I'm not going to do that. I have them walk me through their products and their needs. I ask them what I can do to make them happier or more productive. Let's go back to the basics of servant leadership that all the really good early agile folks did. As an executive, I should be a servant leader. I should be asking my folks how I can make them more productive, happier, more successful. And I need to find some things in there that I can do, maybe small ones, that reinforce the idea that I'm actually on their side and trying to help them succeed. So often in day one or day two, I hear that we didn't buy the software tool that the product folks want to do road mapping because it costs $200 a month. Okay. And so I go to the CEO and I say, look, I'm going to sign for $200 a month. And if you argue with me, I'm out of here. And then I'm able to come back to my team and say, you asked me for a thing that I could do. And here it is. If I see two teams that have a lot of cross dependencies or in each other's pockets a lot, I want to neighbor with the head of engineering and design and ask, could we resegment the work so that each team is 80% independent instead of 40% independent? Because that'll make everybody happier and more productive. And we can do that without having to go to the rest of the company and beg and plead. There's a bunch of things one can fix or do that are within scope. And I think it's my obligation to the folks who are working for me, at least short term, to find some ways to prove, to show, not just say, that I'm going to do my best to make them more productive, more happy, more better at their thing, more protected, fewer interrupts, whatever it is. Now, can I demonstrate in a week? I think I can.
This sounds like a good place to go to summaries. Donna, do you want to kick us off?
I'm going to start my summary with that advice about showing the change. You certainly talked a lot about listening to each other, caring, identifying something that is achievable, making the change, but also then talking about the change, helping other people see that a thing happened. We certainly talked early on about the importance of money talk and understanding how the money works in an organization and not talking about what you do, but understanding
why people care about what you do.
Another good insight for me was that everybody else has a to-do list that doesn't look like your to-do list. And it isn't just an easy logic of saying, which one shall we toss out? Because that needs to go across a bunch of people. And if you're feeling that you're not in a place that is good for you, be thinking about your next gig part of your time each week. They are the interesting insights for me.
Good. And the last thing I'd add is when we characterize something as politics, generally we're making a value judgment that it's not good. And I turn that around and I say, whatever we call it, the humans around the executive table have a lot of interaction styles. And if we dislike them and don't respect them and think the thing they do is of low value, then we undercut ourselves in the organization and we put ourselves in a corner where only people who speak scientifically get our respect.
Yeah, reframing it as organization change is good. What I am trying to do here is change the organization where I can to make it better. And maybe that starts with my team. And I can't do everything, but I'm going to pick my battles and find some things I can do to make the organization better, because then I'll be more successful and so will the people around me.
And you still have to make that same evaluation of how possible is it? How successful can I be here? Because you don't want to spend the next 9 years in an organization that you can't make that change in, but you also don't want to quit and run after a week.
Yeah, because this sort of conflict, if we use that term instead of politics, this conflict is everywhere all the time. Some places it's more harmonious. Sometimes it's brutal and you've got to work out where you are. I have walked away from toxic organizations, but that's because I can afford to do that financially and not everyone can.
So a really clear signpost here, any organization that has a policy that says they cut the bottom 5 or 10% of people based on poor performance is creating all of those conditions for people to undercut each other so that they're not the one who's fired. So there's a lot of things you can do structurally that blow up your culture. And there's no fixing that unless you go to the top and take that policy away. So there's local change, there's global change within the company. And we have to see if we can find ways and places and methods to make it better at the level we're at. And I think we have to have some trust in the folks above us that our efforts are going to be appreciated and rewarded, or it's bad.
Yeah, we talked about building alignment with your boss. You've got to get aligned with your boss. If you're not aligned with your boss, then you're stuffed.
Yes.
And then you can agree together on what issues are worth tackling. You can have confidential discussions about where you're being undermined and work together to try and make some organizational change. Because as an individual person, there's not much you can do. You really need the support of people above you and the people around you to make a change.
You do. More than once in my career, I've had somebody working for me who was really good, who was stymied in getting a promotion, who wasn't getting the work they needed, or the company wasn't succeeding, or there was never going to be a promotion. And I take it on myself to help them find their next job without telling anyone else at the company, because I owe them the long-term respect to get them where they need to be. Now, we have to agree that we're not going to say those words in the company and they're going to continue to do their best job and we're going to look like the team we are. But I have relationships with folks who've worked with and for me over the years that are bigger than the companies we worked at because we made them that way. And I helped them find better jobs for themselves, even though I was working against my own best interests because they were the best person on my team.
I think that another important thing we covered is that the stories that we tell in organizations are just stories.
They're important, they're powerful, but they're just stories.
They're very powerful, but they may bear little resemblance to reality. And if you say that the emperor has no clothes, you could get yourself in serious trouble. So your approach to that was quite interesting because you didn't have a big argument with people saying, oh, engineering can do things. You just listened, you accepted it, and then you went to engineering and said, look, here's the issue. We got to deliver. What can you do by Friday? And then you went to see what you could do to change the narrative by actually doing something, which was good.
Correct. Telling people they're wrong and stupid isn't a great strategy.
I would like to say, finally, that if you're the sort of person who thinks that you're going to get promoted and succeed in an organization because you're grinding or spending all your time becoming the expert in something, or even that you're completely focused on achieving whatever it is the organisation asked you to do, that isn't going to get you the promotion and success you want, because that is all secondary to building alliances and getting along with people and playing the game.
There are some organizations where that's true. And it's much more true at the individual to group to director level than it is at the VP level. If you do a really good job and you're a subject expert in a lot of organizations, you can get promoted, but you probably can't get promoted to a VP. And really good organizations have distinguished engineers and distinguished product managers and design leads who don't want to manage people, but are great at what they do. And we pay them a lot of money. We applaud them, and we don't expect, and they don't expect to be in the management ranks because it's not what they want.
Yeah, I think too many of us invested in becoming the expert in something, and maybe it's not worth it.
In a perfect world, the experts find roles where being the expert is the right thing. And that's generally individual contributor or first line manager. Folks who are generalists and deal with the organizational issues often find that the C-level jobs are a better fit for those skills. Notice it's not better. Being a subject expert is not a bad thing. It's just that some jobs in an organization need subject experts, and some jobs need organizational, horizontal, generalist folks. And it would be really good to figure out which jobs in your company you're a match for. Engineers who want to say out loud, that's a really stupid idea, can be great engineers, but I don't want to put them in front of the executives of my biggest customer. So for me, a lot of this is self-awareness and understanding of what's required, because maybe you're in a job where you are the expert and you love it, and everybody appreciates you and they pay you a lot of money and they fly you around the world to do that. And the last thing you want to do is to be a VP.
I am that person. And this is why I find all of this really interesting, because it's not my world and I never could figure it out. So I love understanding how people work it, because it was always just a big mess to me. I could make friendships, relationships, but not influence well, which is why I've worked in startups and consulting.
And if influencing is not your superpower, and if influencing is not what you want to spend your energy on, and it frustrates you and makes you unhappy, then there are certain jobs that are good for you, and there are certain jobs that are bad for you. And being the head of product at a medium to large company is a bad choice if you think influencing is not something you want to be good at.
Yeah. And it's good to talk about this so that people can understand and think about where they do fit and why they're in pain and what that pain's about.
One last thought for me. I was an engineer for my first 2 years of work, and I was not a great engineer. And I carry that with me every day, because when I sit with great engineers, I have to bring appreciation and humility to say, I'm not a great engineer. Okay. So don't put me in an engineering job, and I don't want to run engineering, and I don't want to review your code or design your architecture. Don't put me in that job because I will fail. There's some self-honesty here where you recognize what you're good at and you try to find roles where that's what the role needs so you can succeed and blossom.
All right. Good place to come to the end. Rich, where can people learn more about you and how you can help?
I cleverly have my last name as my domain. And so my email address, rich@mironov.com, is my name and my website and my handle on all of the social networks. Key things people might come to me for: one-on-one coaching at the VP or CPO level on these kinds of issues. Organizational design. How do we structure our maker teams to make sense? And sometimes really early stage reactions, business models. What's my opinion of this startup that we haven't started yet?
That's great. Thanks for coming on. That was No Nonsense Leadership from Murray Robinson and Donna Spencer. If you'd like to explore better ways to develop software products and services, contact Donna on LinkedIn and Murray at evolve.co. That's evolve with a 0. Thanks for listening.